Okay, good evening, everyone. We'll start tonight's informal gathering of the Whyalla City Council. In starting, I'd just like to firstly acknowledge that we're meeting tonight on the traditional lands of the Whyalla people and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to everyone who's joined us online tonight for tonight's live stream of this informal briefing. Just before we get into the meeting proper, just want to confirm that tonight we have got a couple of items that will need to be discussed in confidence. So at that time, we'll ask anyone who is in the meeting to bear with us as the elected members and staff go off into a confidential breakout room for that confidential discussion. Also noting that members from the public are not able to ask questions or contribute to tonight's meeting. Also a reminder that tonight is not a formal decision-making forum. It is for discussion only, and in line with local government meeting regulations, only council decisions made in a formally constituted council meeting are legally binding. So thank you for joining us, and with those preambles we'll make a start. Tonight we've got two items listed for discussion. The first one is the draft memorial policy, which went to the last council meeting, and the resolution at the council meeting was that further discussion was warranted. So we'll discuss that item, and then the second item is in relation to the 2022-23 budget deliberations. With the first item in relation to the memorial policy, we circulated a memorandum and some additional information. What I might do is in the first instance go to Jade, if I can get Jade to talk to this item, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
I've actually got Liz to talk to the item, but she's not on our she's clicked on the public link, so can we bear with me while I sort that out first?
Yep, just whilst we wait for Liz to come online, we might just start with any initial questions or comments from councillors, and then we'll deep dive into the detail. Any councillors got any questions in relation to the draft memorial policy and the further information that was provided? No? Okay, well, we'll wait for Liz to join us and then we'll go through some of the detail.
Liz is online now, Justin.
Hello and good evening, members. Sorry, that was just a little technical glitch.
Yep, so Liz, we are ready to discuss the draft memorial policy and the additional information that you circulated. Did you want to provide a summary briefing in terms of any of the additional information presented?
No, thank you, Justin. I don't. I guess realistically, this was an adjourned item. I would really like to, I'm really interested in what the members' feedback is, obviously for you to feel comfortable enough for the draft policy to be shared with the community for consultation. You would like a bit more information. I have some questions there that I'm particularly interested to gain your feedback with, and I guess then after that, at the conclusion of that, can be considered at a future council meeting, so that the policy can therefore, the draft policy can be shared with the community for consultation.
Okay, so councillors, maybe if we go straight to the last page of the presentation in the papers, which is on page 10 of your agenda. There's a number of questions there. So the first one is, what type of memorial options would councillors like to see outside of the cemetery? Does anyone want to kick off with that one? Deputy Mayor Stone, and then followed by Councillor Simpson.
Yeah, I'll kick it off, Justin. I think a bench seat is quite appropriate in most cases. And looking at those 6 photos of existing benches, if you call them 1 to 6, I believe a traditional either number 1 or number 6, that style where you've got enough room for 3 or 4 plaques, or if it's appropriate, somewhere else, a tree could have a plaque on it. That would be my main idea, without going into huge, large extra artworks or different styles, and that way they can be useful throughout the city, as well as still relatively consistent. In reference to the question 3 about in certain locations across the city, I just say on a case-by-case situation, we'd already have a good idea where people want, and unless there are too many that are wanted at the one site, for example, the foreshore Adirond Gardens, if everybody wanted them in the exact same spot, then administration just use their ability to sort them out. And in regards to question 4, I would think if it's a bench seat and it's a site where we do have a shortage of seating, that perhaps we should consider a partial cost factor. But if I want a memorial somewhere that nobody else goes or hardly anybody, then perhaps the full cost is the individuals. But certainly like the questions and I like the suggestions that's been put up. And certainly I'd rather see a more traditional type bench seat than the original idea. Particularly, a lot of people need a backrest if they're going to sit there for a while and not sort of slump over as if they're at the footy. But no, some very good information that's come back.
Thank you. Councillor Simpson.
Yeah, I agree in the fact that the bench seating is the most applicable, and locations would be obviously the cemetery, foreshore and Adirond Gardens would be the main 3. So I'm pretty much agreeing there too.
Any other councillors want to offer a comment? Councillor Zia and Westerman.
Yep, I think a seating idea would be the best. Something plain and modern that does get used, so it doesn't get in the way of the view or scenery. I guess another place could be maybe up at Hummock Hill, because people like to sit up there as well. That might be another good one.
Mayor McLaughlin.
Yeah, thank you. I think what everyone said is really good, the information. I think also some other locations. I think it really is a case-by-case basis based on what the particular person's likes, history is, relevance to a certain location within our city. And I think it could also be places even like Jubilee Park, but potentially if they were involved with a show, or whether they sporting interests, or even at the dog park. I mean, you don't know. So it's just, we've got lots of wonderful spots around the city that I think could be benefited from having some more seating, but also to obviously reflect and as a memorial to to people or whatever we want to celebrate. So I think we've got lots of options in the city, but I definitely think that the seat idea with the backing, which is, as Deputy Mayor Stone said, is really is what we're probably looking for. So I'm happy with that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Councillor Pond.
I absolutely agree with everything our Mayor just said. I think case by case situation is definitely the best way to go, and definitely agreeing with the seat option. But I'd just like to make everybody aware that the Suicide Prevention Network have just released their public consultation on Sunday, and they're looking for different ideas of where a memorial can be put up for our survivors of suicide, but also families to go along to. So the outcome of that would be interesting to see as well.
Thank you, Councillor Pond. Liz, do you need any other feedback at this point in time? We'll take on board, obviously, those comments, and we will bring the draft policy back to Council for formal consideration. Is there anything else, Liz, that you would need at this point?
No, that's enough information. Thank you very much for your input, members. Appreciated.
Okay. Jade, you've got a question or comment?
Thank you for all those comments tonight. Only point I'd like to make is that the reason the bench seat that was proposed in the first policy arises is due to the expense related to requesting a bench in a new location. So we've had inquiries from people wanting a memorial on a location in which there's no existing bench seat, and the expense of a bench seat and footings attached to it becomes prohibitive for some people. So we do have to have some sort of parameters around the policy, maybe in the first instance that it's an existing chair. They source an existing bench seat somewhere in council in which a plaque can be attached. The difficulty with that is our plastic bench seats, that's a bit tricky in that regard. There's a certain type of seat that better lends itself to a plaque, but we do need to put some parameters around where and when, and I would just want to touch base with your thoughts on, do we want to start with where some existing bench seats are in play?
Thank you, Jade. Councillors, view about new locations versus existing. Councillor Simpson.
In that report, there's no listing of the dollar value at all. So if we get an idea how much the dollar value is of these benches, it might help us.
I can answer that. The dollar value was in the original report presented to members at the last General Council meeting, and it was to the tune of $1,700 roughly. Yeah, so the original report had a lot of the financials included. That was my oversight, that I didn't actually include them in this little briefing note.
Thanks for that, Jade. Liz?
Any other comments from councillors? Greenfields versus existing sites. Deputy Mayor Stone.
Just a clarification there, Liz. That 1,700, is that for the new sleeper style, or is that one of the other bench seats? What sort of difference are we looking at from a traditional bench seat and that sleeper style?
I might have to take that on notice, Councillor Stone, and get back to you. I'm happy to look at that because I don't have the exact figure in front of me at this point in time, but I can email that detail to members tomorrow.
I accept the issue that a normal, properly designed bench seat is going to be a lot dearer and it might affect some of the issues. So I can see what Jay's getting at as far as the reasons for the other bench seat. Perhaps it's a bit of both then, depending on where they're going to be. But I'd certainly support any existing seating that we've got if that was going to be the first way out, to have plaques on existing seats, unless they really want a special one somewhere else.
And so we could certainly build in that as an option, that if you can afford, and I think there has to be an assessment process here. I think we have to be realistic and that we wouldn't want 5 or 6 bench seats in a vicinity, even to the point where if someone could afford an entirely new installation, we just wouldn't want that many seats in a spot. So we'll have to have an assessment process. Some of those policies that were provided as examples from other councils include a little committee in where this is assessed. And look, it could be a standing item on our agenda, particularly for certain categories. So a plaque perhaps on an existing bench seat we can process easily enough. Perhaps if there's a request for an entirely new installation, we may want to bring that to yourselves in a type standing item to suggest, would we contemplate one here, and at their cost perhaps.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. I think we might move off that discussion item. So thank you, councillors, for that feedback. We'll pick up those comments and shape those or bring those back with a revised draft policy for your consideration with some supplementary information. All right. Thanks, Liz and Jade, for bringing that item back to council so quickly. We'll now move on to the second item, which is the substantive item on tonight's agenda for discussion regarding the 22-23 budget. So we provided some information to councillors on Friday of last week. What we wanted to do is literally walk through that information, because in the absence of Grant's expertise to explain what the numbers are and why the numbers are where they are, it's obviously a bit hard to fully digest in that vacuum. So we'll go through and discuss what's currently in the draft budget. One of the some of the discussion will need to be in confidence, and so we'll break out into a breakout room at some stage during this conversation, and also noting that we have a detailed budget session set up for next Monday night, which is to do with buildings. So tonight, it may be that anything to do with buildings we just park, because we do want to do a full review of our building stock with councillors and to discuss what facilities we provide in delivering what services and at what standard to our community. So we'll have a whole session next week focused particularly on buildings. So with that little introduction, I might hand over to Grant and get him to probably share his screen so that we can work through the content together.
Thanks, Justin. Hi, members. How you going? All right, so we'll bring up the presentation. Don't want in that mode. All right. So yeah, so this the information included in this presentation mainly mirrors and just expands on a little bit the information we sent out last Friday to elected members with the agenda. So yeah. Now, can you see my screen all right? Have I, maybe I haven't shared it yet. That was why it went weird. My apologies. There we go. Right. Excellent. So the agenda we'll go through is we'll talk about the budget process to date. We'll talk about capital budgets which were presented in those in information to elected members. We'll then talk about some new initiatives that have been suggested through the budget process to date and the process we've undertaken. Look at our long-term financial plan projections. Start the conversation around options for returning to surplus in line with the KPI that's been set for Justin, We'll talk about what the proposed rate increase and fees and charge increases are for the year, and then talk about the key messages for the annual business plan and the consultation with the community that we'll be undertaking. So just start very quickly. So obviously elected members have seen the adopted budget parameters a number of times. So these were discussed early in the process, and council adopted these parameters in January. So this is obviously what we're using to formulate the budget as we move through the process. And so what we've been doing this year is working through the development of business unit plans. So that's probably the missing link we've probably had between the adopting, the annual business plan, but then, outlining all the items and the things that we're doing to deliver on council's strategic plan. So they sort of sit in the middle there. For each business unit. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on within each area to deliver on the strategic plan. So this was making sure that we can bring all of that forward into the annual business plan document and show the community all of that, but also feeds back to each area, and so they can easily see how they're delivering on the strategic plan. So because we're undertaking this process, it's been a bit more of, rather than focusing on business as usual, it's been about the items that are outside business as usual. So maybe process improvements, new items or improvements that are needed to deliver services in a better way. So that's really what these business plan development has focused on. These items, so each area has gone through that process, and then the items have been prioritised against council's strategic objectives. So we had like a tool that managers used to do that process, and then the leadership discussed the items as a group to sort of get like a group understanding, but also to help reduce the list down to items that everyone considered to be both important and urgent. And so these plans are, as I've said at the start, are a key input into the annual business plan, and they'll make up the initiatives that we'll be reporting back to the community on. And obviously there's other inputs into the process as well. With as we discussed a little bit last week, some of the big external items that are feeding into the budget are obviously the election, the recent announcements around the city and things that are happening here, and the impacts that's flowing through probably onto future populations and livability. So they're some of the very high level big things that are forming where we are in the budget process. But also there's the things where council dealing with a whole bunch of legacy issues. So I'm sorry, I haven't updated this figure yet, but there is a report. Progress has been made on a lot of those items. So that report, I think, is being developed now, our plan, that 10-year plan to address the remaining items. And then that'll be integrated. So these legacy issues will be integrated into the overall planning process, including into those business unit plans that we were discussing on the previous slide. So making sure that each area understand how they are helping to deal with those legacy issues and fix those moving forward. So that's the background, I guess, of what's feeding into our annual business plan. I guess the next bit that feeds in is our asset management plans, and so they obviously inform our renewal budgets and what's come out of those. So we'll start with the building renewal budget, and so one of the things we wanted to flag was that this so obviously we get the data that's flowing through out of those asset management plans, but then that has also been worked through internally in terms of potentially taking out or moving out some buildings that may be flagged for divestment. So obviously next week's workshop, a big part of the discussion will be on a bit of a strategy for our buildings moving forward. So where buildings are probably, the ones that are higher up on the list flagged for divestment, we wouldn't be looking to probably be doing renewal next year. So this list, while it comes out of our data, it has been refined. and now is the list of building works that we feel need to occur next year based on our the condition of these buildings, and, where they're at in their life cycle. Oh, and I will one thing. So one thing that's probably changed from last year's, a thing that's been flagged has been looking to sort of provide for 2 toilet replacements each financial year to really start to update that part of the building asset class. And what we've allowed for here is $300,000 at the moment, with the thinking being that in the past few years we have actually been able to get matching funding to do toilets, and so the thinking being that we would go for matching funding, which would allow us to do 2 toilets at a high level of service, whereas if we weren't able to get matching funding, you could deliver 2 toilets for 300,000, but they would be at the probably the existing sort of level of service, a new facility, but at existing levels of service, whereas that matching funding would allow a higher level of service to be provided. And then the open space asset class. So the big thing in here, I mean, we always have our playground replacement program. One of the playgrounds flagged for next year is the childcare centre playground. It is our end of life and it fits in well with the upgrade that's happening to the building. So timing those 2 together made sense. So that sort of came in from 2 areas, and then there's some. So we're actually replacing 3 playgrounds on the list for next year. Lacey and Georgia, not huge ones, and then some minor open space assets that are due for renewal, with a plan a little bit like the toilets, just to make sure that we're replacing our barbecues as they come towards end of life over the next few years. The renewal budget for plant and equipment. So this just comes out of our asset replacement schedules. They've all been checked, and a few vehicles have been pushed out. The figure is a little bit higher for next year, but that is because some have already been retimed from the previous year. So some of the ones we had budgeted for were pushed out an extra year. But yeah, replacement of 4 mowers every year is what we need to do to keep up with the keeping them replaced in their useful lives, and we've got 8 fleet vehicles, and only 1 major bit of plant being our street sweeper that's due for renewal. And there's also some equipment, as that's IT equipment that's reaching end of life.
Just
and the
quickly.
last, sorry,
keep going. Just when you get to the end of the renewal budget, we'll just
we'll stop to discuss. So, and then the last 2 bits are sort of our programmed based stuff. So this, so 2021-22 is currently the 3rd year of the existing program. Obviously, that was where we were dealing with a lot of backlog of transport renewal, and we have had about an average spend of 4.5 million per year for 3 years. But that was sort of like a one-off extra spend, and now we'll be heading back down to sort of a more normal spend, I guess, long term for our transport. So for the next 3 years, we need to spend about 1.5 million to keep up with the roads that are coming towards end of life. So the next 3-year program is in the final stages of development currently, and that's getting ready to go out, and then they can go for tender in the next few months. So that covers roads, footpaths and curbs. So as you can see, a lot lower spend than the previous 3 years where we've dealt with that backlog. And then the new one, I guess, is now that we've got good data on our irrigation network, so finished that about 6 months ago, the last financial year, got our data on our irrigation network the same as our other asset classes. So now a program is being developed for replacement of the irrigation network. So on average, each year we probably need about 200,000 of renewal based on the value of the asset class and where it is in its life cycle. But we'll start off with an allocation of 100,000 as that program is developed and we get that underway. So yes, that's the renewal programs, if people wanted to discuss the items in there.
Yep, so we'll just press pause there. Councillors, so renewal budget is essentially sort of for all intents and purposes, the like-for-like replacement of existing assets. Any questions in relation to those items? I'm sure there'll be some around the buildings. We can take a couple of initial questions, but we'll deep dive into the buildings next week. Deputy Mayor Stone.
Thank you, CEO. I'll certainly leave the buildings alone. Just for pure clarification, the new transport program, I presume that's primarily roadworks, that $1 million plus? That is generally roadworks. The 100,000 for irrigation, now this might be a naive question, is that actually undertaking work, or is that 100,000 purely to develop the program?
Oh, no, so that is $100,000 of replacement. No, the program is being developed now in the current year to identify which bits of the network need to be replaced using that $100,000 next year. So it's a little bit like a transport program. It's being developed off the data to see which bits are at end of life.
Just regarding the rec and open spaces, question regarding our playgrounds. Now, this might be unpopular in certain areas, but is it perhaps time? Past councils have done it and nothing's ever happened, but is it perhaps time that we start looking at the usage of our playgrounds? I do note reference to develop a updated playground strategy, but at my last count, I do believe we've got something like more than 30 odd playgrounds around Whyalla. Is it perhaps time to review, are they all actually being well used? Would fewer be better because we could concentrate? This is like a catch-22. It's been and done before, but never progressed. Now, I just live around the corner from Lacey Street. To see $60,000 being spent there, I don't think I've ever driven past it. I drive past it regularly to see people using it, whereas you drive past a lot of other playgrounds, no matter what hour of the day, and there are people using it. So I just wonder, as I said, this is always an unpopular subject about whether we rationalise to improve a few really good ones. And I guess that was my question, is posed based on the fact that we're allocating the money for those two playgrounds as to, is it something we should be looking at for the future? And I guess the other thing to do with playgrounds, and I know it adds to the cost, but should we now not start looking at, as playgrounds are replaced or priority ones identified, should we be trying to include appropriate shelters from the sun for their use during summer? Because I'm quite sure on social media, every time we announce a playground, there's always comments about the lack of shelter and the likes. Now, I know it's extra costs, but should we, as a duty of care, be looking at that, trying to gradually introduce it into our playground structure?
You've raised some very good questions there, Councillor Stone, and they're very much items that we anticipate will be picked up as part of the playground and open space development. Kristen Clark, would you like to make a little bit of comment about what our current policy is in relation to playgrounds?
Thank you. There's probably a couple of things that come to mind. I think council has a policy that states that there'll be a playground within 500 metres of every home, and I think that has generated us having a lot of playgrounds. Again, I think that the policy or the document that I'm picturing, I think might have even been authored back in 2013, 2014, so it is quite old. And that's one of the reasons that we're driving to get a playground, strategic plan done now. I agree with your comments around Lacey Street. The playground is small and it doesn't feel busy to me, and it might well be that we go back and have a look at that and maybe either look to save the money or find a playground that is that has more use and gets more public value for the spend. Noted about the shade. I think that's it. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Stupos, did you have a question or comment? You just need to press unmute.
All right. Just echoing what Phil said regarding Lacey Street and George's Lane, I just don't think the volume of patronage in those two playgrounds is a great deal. And maybe we could reallocate that expense, say, down to a more popular area like Adrian Gardens or the Foreshore, where I think the patronage is quite high. The more equipment and the more equipment down there, more people will come and use it. That was my comment. I know it's not popular, by the way.
Okay, all right, we'll take on board those comments. I think with our planning for open spaces, it will to some extent go a little bit hand in hand with where what facilities we have in different locations. So unless you've got another comment, Kristen, I see your hands raised.
Yeah, thank you. We do have 28 playgrounds, and I guess our management strategy has been to replace 2 of them per year. Agreed around Lacey Street. George Lane, I think that's the small one, probably behind the George Avenue shops. Again, I haven't probably driven past that one recently, but just know that that's a heavily built up residential area. That one may be busier than Lacey Street, but we'll take the point on board and see where the best value for money is for playgrounds.
Okay, any other questions about the renewal budget? This is going to be a work in progress, so we're not making a definitive decision now. We're working through some of the building blocks of the budget. So if there's no other questions now, we'll move on, and then we can come back and talk about those building blocks as a collective. So back to you, Grant.
Thanks, Justin. All right, so we'll move on to the new upgrade budget. So probably a little bit less discussion around this. It's a bit smaller of an item, but also so really the new upgrade budget has been fairly in the majority of it has been set by previous decisions. So when we adopted the budget for this year, 21-22, we actually adopted a 2-year budget, mainly around being able to fund the Cuttlefish Coast Sanctuary project. So that's the big item that is in next year's new upgrade budget. So year 2 of that project, obviously that's a 50% funded project. The other one that we allowed for is that we allowed 600,000 for foreshore master plan projects. So obviously when we were adopting the budget last year, we knew that that would be coming up. So we've put in 300,000 from council and then matching funding of 300,000. There is already $700,000 in the budget, in this year's budget, that was covered by the local roads and community infrastructure program. So that'll probably get rolled forward to next year. It hasn't at this stage, but so there will be money as available to start getting deliverables out of that master plan. The last item on there, the street tree replacement program, was also the last item that we included in the new upgrade budget. We have actually got some funding recently to do the sort of the entrance from the Iron Knob side of town, and so we had $90,000 within the program, and so now I've got 72,500 of funding. So it's not quite 50% funded, that program, but yeah, there is funding within that. And the one that was added during the year was the childcare centre upgrade. So that was obviously a separate council decision with its own funding model. So it was a total of 900,000, with 300,000 of that sitting in the current year's budget, and that's a 50% funded project as well. So basically, those budgets were set by the adoption of the budget or the separate council item in the current year. But on top of, so those are obviously the items that are sitting in the budget, but the total capital spend looks a little bit higher than that because there are some projects that have already been retimed from that have already been approved by council in the current year, but due to updated project timetables, they've been rolled forward. So Jubilee Park Change Room, that's a funded project. The demolition is happening this year, and that's being rolled forward. We did have an allocation in for Marina Renewal that was originally put in last year because of we thought we were doing things with the Clean Seas agreement that obviously wasn't required. So this Marina Renewal is now focusing more around the foreshore master plan outcomes. And is being designed currently. There's an item for a levy bank extension, some spurs off of that got rolled forward. There was the rec centre slide that might change into something else based on the outcomes of that rec centre master plan. Might not be a slide, might be some other sort of recreational equipment in there. the Little Athletics track. So originally this budget was a lot higher. There's been a solution found to deliver that, to do that renewal at a lower cost, but still meet the requirements of the user groups out there. And then there's this item, Patterson Street Art Space, that's probably moved on a little bit and may not be used for that. So that's probably a one that's up for discussion about where that ends up being allocated. So those items all have already been retimed during the first or second quarter budget review. And then there's a few other items that will likely have at least some expenditure go over to next year. So Cuttlefish Coast Year 1, some of that expenditure will move forward. The airport airside works may go past June. We know the airport hydrants is happening next year now. And then, yeah, some other projects that have design done but are not necessarily starting quite yet. So, yeah, so just like so, obviously, the renewal budget and the new upgrade budget, might be around sort of that $10 million mark, but there is other funds sitting in the capital budget that have been retimed from this year, from a delivery point of view. And I guess that brings us to, was there any discussion on the new upgrade budget?
Councillors, any councillors have any questions about what's in the current capital program at this point in time? No. All right, we'll come back once we've put it all together.
And so then that brings us to our current long-term financial plan projections. So this is current state, so it basically includes business as usual operating, that sort of thing, and then includes those capital programs that we've just gone through. So what it shows is a deficit of about 1.2 million for council only in the current year, and then there's fairly consistent deficits across the 10 years currently. And then the airport has got fairly consistent deficits at the moment as well. And then that shows what the combined council, including the airport, looks like. I guess the discussion around the airport is that needs to probably have a bit of a separate discussion around how we fund the airport ongoing. Once we've finished the major capital programs out there, we'll be able to get a bit of a better sense of what the ongoing depreciation around that will look like in detail. It's obviously estimated at the moment, but yeah, further discussions also around ongoing fees and that sort of thing. So I guess that's a separate discussion almost for the airport. So this council only is probably what we're concentrating on when we look at how we're tracking along and what our deficits are doing. And you can see here that under this current model, the loans are sort of slowly creeping up over the term of the long-term financial plan. Yeah, so that's as is, and obviously later in the presentation we talk about potential funding models for improving council's position. But before we get there,
just before you move on, Councillor Stupos, you have got a question?
Yes, I have. Grant, I was a bit confused with the airport budget because in 2031, the loan dropped to 3.85 mil, and then in the 32 year, it jumped to 5.35 mil.
It does, because the security equipment, the model currently assumes we have to replace the security equipment when it gets to the end of its 10-year life, and that'll be that year there. Seeing as we're not allowed to recoup the depreciation on it, which is one of the reasons, part of the issue with the airport is there's some things that have been grant funded that in theory we're not actually meant to collect or recoup. We almost have to run the airport at a loss. So that would tell me that if we're expected to do that, you would think the federal government would be replacing our equipment for us if we're not allowed to recoup the cost of it. But at the moment, the model does assume that after the 10 years, we do have to purchase that equipment, which is about the it'll be probably about 1.3 million, I think was the projected value of it at that point in time. And so that's why the loans jump up.
Councillor Simpson?
Yeah, on that issue, when it gets closer that year, obviously it'll be up to negotiations or discussions with the government about them renewing it, wouldn't we? Obviously.
Yeah, we certainly will be having discussions, and we won't be leaving it to when we get to that. We'll be having those discussions very, very soon. I think it'll be an ongoing discussion until we've got a solution in hand. Okay, Grant, get you to move forward.
Excellent. So that was the, as I said, that was with only business as usual type operating items in there. So next we're just going to go through I guess the initiatives that have come out of that business planning process that's been done across the organisation. And the first one is, these are often the items that have probably been missed in previous annual business plans, where there's a whole bunch of items being reviewed. Or initiatives that are being delivered using existing resources internally. So basically this is a list of items that we are funding using existing resources and not putting extra into the budget for. So I think that's these are important things to have in our annual business plan and to make sure that we're reporting out to the community all the things that we are achieving.
We'll take any questions. So we'll take that as read, but is there any questions from councillors on that slide? No, that's fine. All right. We'll move.
So now we move on to the ones that have been identified that do have budget allocations required. So these are split into sort of the next 3 slides. So there's items that are one-off operating in nature. That's this page. Then there's items that are an ongoing sort of change in service level. And then there's the items that are sort of minor capital items that weren't captured in that larger new upgrade budget last year. So yes, any questions on? So these were all presented to council in the paperwork sent out last Friday. So happy to take any questions or discussion on any of this.
So the slide in front of councillors at present are the one-off increases across 2 years. Any questions or comments on those ones at this point in time? Councillor Stupos?
With regards to the dredging of both marinas, would that form part of the master plan, the foreshore master plan?
I'd say probably, sorry, Grant, if I can respond. What you do within the marinas and landside, which is the focus of the master plans, all work on the assumption that boats can get in and out of the marina. Over time, we got the situation with increasing sand or silt in those areas, reducing the functionality of the marinas. So one of the necessary maintenance requirements to maintain the marinas is to periodically dredge them. We've worked on the assumption that we'd do both at the same time because of the mobilisation costs, and we've also worked on the assumption that we would get some grant funding to contribute to the costs of doing the dredging. But it comes down to the fundamental service. Do you want to provide a marina or not? Any other questions or comments on that one? All right, we'll do it by exception, and again, we can come back to these slides once we get to the end. We'll go to the next slide, Grant.
These are the ongoing items that have been included, not from year 1, and they show up in year 2 because obviously they continue across the long-term financial plan. I guess the big one in there is starting to allow for demolition of buildings, which is something that we've always sort of had to budget for by exception previously.
Again, any questions from councillors on that one at this point in time? Okay, next slide.
Yep, and so this is our new initiatives. So these are minor capital type items. So I guess a couple that we've added recently, I guess, from discussions and things. So obviously there's been a bit of talk about walking trails in the city and having the ability to sort of leverage funding. There tends to be money each year in the bicycle fund. So we have suggested putting some money in to be able to get that. And the other item that seems to come up quite a lot is the continuing to upgrade Golfview Drive. So get a few inquiries about that. So we have flagged putting an application back in for that. That was something we had done previously each year.
So again, just pausing. Any questions or comments at this point in time from councillors? No? Okay.
Cool. And then I guess the last list, so this is items where they did sort of come up during the discussion and the business planning process of items that are coming up but haven't yet been. So in a second, I'll show you the model with the items that we are suggesting to go into the long-term financial plan and budget. I guess these ones here have not been put into the budget model at this stage. I guess, you know, a few of them up near the top there, that they probably need their own funding plan and, you know, discussion around how that will be funded. Some of those will be through, you know, rationalisation of another asset, those sorts of things. So that's its own discussion point. And there is quite a large one further down that probably needs further discussion as well at some point. The potential to replace our curbside bins and move to RFID technology. But yeah, there's a few items there that have been brought up, but have been deferred for later conversations.
Yeah. So again, councillors, any there that you think are absolutely imperative to be factored into the budget within the next 1 or 2 years? A couple of them we will need to include at some stage, and as Grant just alluded to, we'll need to look at how we fund things like system modernisation and also replacement of curbside bins. But again, any initial comments, reactions or views from councillors? No, that's all right. We'll move on.
Cool. And so then that brings brought some updated long-term financial plan projections with those additions in. So I've only done the council only. There's no, these don't impact the airport. So it's just the council only projections. So, you know, it means that the current year coming up would be about a $1.7 million deficit. And similar to before, there's a fairly similar deficit across, but it is a bit higher, obviously, than the other model with the additions in there. And once again, borrowing still peaking at the end of the plan.
So at this point of the discussion, what I'm going to suggest is that we now go into a confidential discussion, because what those projections are showing is that the council is running at an operating deficit for every year for the next 10 years. Which another way of simplifying that is it's financially unsustainable. So we will need to discuss how we redress that situation. I'll just ask councillors and staff if you can just sit patient whilst we transfer ourselves across into the confidential briefing session. For any public members, we'll be returning to the public forum once we finish the confidential discussion. Thank you. All right, so thank you, councillors, for that conversation. Just now that we're back in the public domain, just want to confirm that our next workshop regarding the draft budget and long-term financial plan will be on Tuesday of next week, where we'll focus specifically on our buildings as a key item of focus. So until then, thank everyone for their contribution tonight and look forward to talking some more next week. Thank you.